Welcome back to Speducation. I am your host, Brandon Reed, and as always, if this is your first time to the channel, a special welcome to you. Well, it's a new week and we have a new lesson, and we are fresh back from spring break. I know that I had a great spring break. I got to spend time with my family, and hopefully you did too. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. Today's lesson, timelines, manifestation determination timelines. That's right. Manifestation determination hearings. Everybody's favorite type of conference. If you can't tell, I'm being sarcastic there. Yeah, manifestation determination hearings are not that fun. But just like with all of the other types of case conferences that we have, there are timelines that go along with it. So, what are the timelines that are associated with a manifestation determination hearing? Well, before we can get to the timelines, we need to first understand what a manifestation determination hearing is. And I've done a video over this type of conference, but for those of you who may not remember, or those of you who are new to the channel, a manifestation determination review, or MDR, meetings are required when a student protected under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, and who is eligible for special education services under Indiana Article 7, violates a school code of conduct that results in a disciplinary change of placement. So, when we're talking about manifestation determination hearings, there are timelines that are specific to these types of conferences. Now, there are similar timelines that follow the manifestation determination hearings, but in terms of expulsion or change of placement for the student, there are certain timelines that are only applied to this type of case conference. According to the law, 34 CFR 300.536 of IDEA and Indiana Article 7, Rule 44, a change of placement occurs when a student with an IEP is excluded from receiving free and appropriate public education, also known as FAPE, through out-of-school suspension for over 10 consecutive school days, out-of-school suspension for over 10 school days within a school year that are not consecutive, but the behaviors represent a pattern, or if a student is expelled from school, including suspensions pending expulsion. Now, keep in mind, in-school suspensions do not count towards the 10 days if the student is able to access FAPE as outlined in their IEP. Removal for partial day is also considered a day of removal. So if a student is in ISS, but they're still getting the special ed services that they would get in the general ed setting, then you wouldn't count that as a day of suspension. Now, as for the 10-day timeline, within 10 school days of the placement change decision, the LEA, or local education agency, must schedule a case conference committee convening with the parent and other members for a manifestation determination review pursuant to 511 IAC 7-44-5A. A 45-day timeline. If removal is due to special circumstances, such as a weapon, illicit drugs, infliction of serious bodily injury, the student may be removed to an interim alternative educational setting, or IAES, for up to 45 school days. The case conference committee must determine the IAES and appropriate services. So that basically means a couple of things. One, the in-school suspension. Again, if a student is able to be put in in-school suspension, but they can still receive special ed services like they would in a general ed class, then it wouldn't be considered a suspension day. I mean, yes, they are suspended, but they wouldn't be considered out of school suspension because they're still receiving special ed services. So that in-school suspension day would not count towards the 10 out of school suspension days. And then the 45-day timeline. There are some instances where a student may do something that automatically gets them technically expelled, such as bringing a weapon to school. In that case, the individual, the student, would be placed in an alternate learning environment. So when I was working at Perry Township, we had an alternative school that we would send students to. And if this was the case where a student brought in a weapon of some sort, obviously we couldn't allow the student to remain in the school, so they would be relocated to this alternative school. But we would still have to hold a manifestation determination hearing to determine whether or not the incident was related to the student's disability or the failure of the school to implement the IEP as written. But we would still have to follow that timeline. And in that case, it would be a 45-day timeline. And just like the other types of conferences, the school has 10 days to provide the parent with a finalized IEP for either approval and signature or rejection following the manifestation determination conference. Once the parent has received their copy of the IEP, the parent has 10 days to either accept or reject the findings. If there is no word from the parent in that time, then the school can move forward with the change of placement. Now, with manifestation determination hearings, it's extremely important that we get the parent's signature. And typically, whenever you have a conference like this, the parent will be present because obviously we need them there for their signature. But if a parent isn't present, then they still have to follow the 10-day timeline. If within 10 days they don't reject the timeline, or the IEP, then the change of placement can take place. But the school will do everything within its power to ensure that the parent has that signature. And again, if the parent does not respond within 10 days, then the school can implement the IEP or the decision of the manifest determination hearing as it was decided. Now, unfortunately, manifestations determination hearings do occur, but they're not happening all the time. And typically, if a student were to get to the point where they have to be expelled, that means that there are a lot of things that were not taken into consideration, such as maybe interventions used, maybe a functional behavior assessment wasn't done, maybe a behavioral intervention plan wasn't implemented. So when you think of manifestation determination hearings, think of them as the last resort. But whenever they do happen, it can be scary. And that is it. That's all the timelines for special education. If you didn't notice, that was me being sarcastic again. There are a lot of other types of timelines in regards to special ed, but many of those depend on the school and the school corporation and how they set those up. For example, what is the timeline from the time that you schedule the case conference to the time that you send the notice of case conference? Well, it depends on the school. A lot of the schools that I worked at, we usually would send them 3 days before the conference as a reminder. How many attempts do you make in order to schedule a case conference before you can hold the case conference without a parent being present? Technically, it's another type of timeline because you have to follow that. So we'll talk about some of those other timelines at another time, but for right now, we're done talking about timelines. And if you're wondering, what are we going to be learning about next week? Well, you're just going to have to tune in to find out. So, if you liked what you saw, you learned something new, or you're new to the channel, please click that like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have questions or comments, or there's a particular topic in special education that you would like me to cover, by all means, drop a line in the comments section and I'd be happy to help. And until next time, class dismissed.